on the night watch, when the long ship had dimmed its lights for the sleeping and only the low hum of the air recyclers moved through the corridors. Enrique went, as he always went, to the observation deck at the front of the ship and sat down at the great curved window and looked out at the stars. He was an old man now, older than almost anyone else awake aboard the ship, and he had made this small journey to the window every night watch for more years than he could easily hold in his mind. The deck was empty at that hour, as it nearly always was, and he liked it so. He liked the quiet and the soft blue light of the instruments. And most of all, he liked the stars, the deep and endless field of them beyond the glass, unmoving and patient, the ship crossing between them so slowly that a whole human life might pass, and the pattern of them hardly seemed to change at all. These were not the stars of Earth. No one now living aboard the ship had ever seen the stars of Earth, nor ever would. The ship had left that pale, blue world generations back, and would not arrive at the new one for generations yet to come, and everyone aboard, the old and the young alike, had been born in the long between, under these unfamiliar stars, in the soft light of a sky that was only a window. And it was Enrique's small and self-appointed task, the task of his old age, to give those stars their names. No one had asked him to do it. There were charts, of course, official charts, on which every star that mattered to the ship's long navigation was marked with its proper designation, a cold string of letters and numbers that told you where a thing was and nothing at all of what it was. Enrique did not quarrel with the charts. They did their work. But it had seemed to him, a long while ago now, that it was a lonely thing to cross a whole sky full of stars and know them only by their numbers, and that children especially deserved better than a number when they looked up. And so, over the years, star by star, he had given them names. Not official names, only his own. And then, little by little, the ships, for the names, had a way of spreading. There was a warm gold star low on the left of the window that he had named the Hearth, because on the cold nights of the soul, it was a comfort to look at. There was a close pair that turned slowly about each other that the children now called the dancers. There was a faint and lonely red one, far out at the edge, that he had named the grandmother, because it was old, the charts said, older than almost any other in the sky, and it burned low and steady and kind, and he liked to think it watched over the rest. He kept them all in a worn notebook on his knee, the names and the little stories that went with them, and he added to it slowly on the quiet night watches, and it was, he supposed, the truest work he had ever done. It was on such a night, deep in the watch, that he heard the small sound of bare feet on the deck behind him, and turned and saw the girl. She was a small thing, perhaps 7, perhaps 8, in her sleep clothes, her hair mussed from a bed she had plainly climbed out of, and she stood at the edge of the deck as though not certain she was allowed to be there. Enrique knew her a little. She was the daughter of one of the hydroponics engineers, a quiet and watchful child. He did not scold her for being out of her bunk at such an hour. He only asked her, gently, whether she could not sleep, and the girl shook her head, and after a moment came a little closer and admitted in a small voice that she had had a bad dream, and that her room was dark, and that she had not wanted to be alone in it. Enrique nodded, as though this were a perfectly reasonable thing, which he believed it was, and he patted the seat beside him at the great window, and told her that she was welcome to sit with him a while and look at the stars until the bad dream had worn off, for he had always found that the stars were very good at wearing off bad dreams. The girl considered this, and then climbed up into the seat beside him, and drew her knees up, and looked out at the enormous quiet sky beyond the glass, and was silent. For a while they only sat, the old man and the child, and looked out at the stars together. Then Enrique began, softly, to tell her their names. He pointed out the Hearth, low and gold, and told her it was a good star to look at when you felt cold inside, and that many people aboard the ship looked at it for just that reason, and that she might too, whenever she wished. He showed her the dancers, turning their slow turnabout each other, and told her they had been dancing like that since long before the ship set out, and would go on dancing long after it arrived, and that they never tired and never trod on each other's feet, and were, he thought, very happy. He showed her the old red grandmother far out at the edge, burning low and steady, watching over the rest, and the girl looked at it a long time. And as he spoke, and named the stars, and gave each its small, warm story. Enrique felt the child beside him grow still, and then easy, the fright going out of her the way it goes out of anyone who is reminded, gently, that the dark is not empty, that it is full of old and patient and kindly lights, and that they have names, and that someone has taken the trouble to know them. When at last the stories wound down, the girl was quiet for a time, and then she asked him a question he had not been asked before in all his years of naming. She asked whether all the stars already had names, or whether there were any left that did not. Enrique smiled in the dark and told her the truth, that there were a great many more stars than one old man could ever name, more than he would name if he sat at the window every night for 100 years, and that the sky was in fact mostly still nameless, waiting. The girl thought about this, and then she asked, shyly, looking down at her knees, whether she might have one. A star of her own, she meant, one that did not have a name yet, that she could name herself and keep and look at whenever she could not sleep and know that it was hers. Enrique felt something turn over gently in his old chest at that. He said that she might, and that in fact he could think of no better keeper for a star. He let her choose. She looked for a long while up and down the great window at all the countless waiting lights, and at last she pointed with a small uncertain finger at a modest blue-white star, not the brightest, off toward the right, and said that she wanted that one. Enrique found it and marked it in his worn notebook and asked her what its name would be. The girl thought hard, the way children think, with her whole face, and then she gave a name, her own small and particular name for it. And Enrique wrote it down beside the star in his own hand so that it would be there always. And then, because it was the important part, the part he had learned over all his years of naming, Enrique told the girl what it meant to be given a star. It meant, he said, that the star was hers to keep, yes, but also hers to care for, in the small way that one cares for a star, which is simply to remember it, and to look at it, and to think of it kindly, so that it is never in all the long dark entirely unknown. And it meant, too, that one day, when she was grown, and perhaps when he himself was long gone, she might sit at this same window with some small frightened child who could not sleep, and give that child a star of their own, and tell them its story, and so keep the naming going, on, down all the generations of the ship, until at last it reached the new world at the far end of the long journey. A whole sky full of stars that were known, and named, and loved by the children who crossed. Beneath them, the girl promised, solemnly, the way children promise, that she would. And then, the bad dream quite worn off now, she grew heavy-eyed against the warm seat, and Enrique walked her back through the dim and humming corridors to her bunk and saw her safely into it, and she was asleep almost before he had gone. Enrique went back to the observation deck and sat down again at the great window and looked out at the sky, at the hearth and the dancers and the old red grandmother, and now at one modest blue-white star off toward the right that had, this night, been given a name and a keeper. He opened his notebook and looked at the fresh writing on the page, the girl's name for her star in his old, careful hand. And he thought that of all the names he had given in all his years, this one pleased him most because it was not really his at all. He was an old man, and he knew that his own night watches at the window were numbered now, and that a day would come, not so very far off, when someone else would sit here in his place. He had wondered, sometimes on the lonelier nights, what would become of the names when he was gone, whether they would fade, whether the sky would go back to being only numbers. But he did not wonder anymore. Somewhere in a bunk down the corridor, a child was sleeping soundly under a star she had named herself, a child who had promised to pass the naming on, and that, Enrique thought, looking out at the patient and kindly lights, was how a thing like this was meant to last. Not in one old man's notebook. In the long, slow handing down, star by star, child by child, all the way to a world none of them would live to see. Wherever you happen to be tonight, and whatever quiet task is keeping your hands busy, thank you for spending this little while here with us. Rest easy, and whenever you are ready, there will always be another story waiting.